afternoon, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your free time. I'm absolutely delighted that Stephen's agreed to come and talk to the CFPSS. From a personal point of view, it's two strands of my life being brought together, which is nice. We've known each other. We go way back, as they say, and we've both been involved for some years together with the Quaker Healing Ministry through the Friends Fellowship of Healing. And so I know Stephen well, and I know he's going to have some interesting insights for you. He's certainly got an intriguing title. Anyway, I'll hand over to Stephen when he's ready.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know what I must have done to be invited here, but I feel very honoured to have been asked to speak with you. On the other hand, I don't know what you lot have done wrong to have me inflicted on you, but but there we go. Yes, an intriguing title, deliberately so, a bit provocative, just to get your interest, really, and I'll explain what that is about in a little while. There are some notes. I don't know whether it's conventional, but there are some. What I'm about to say, I'll be reading mostly from here, unless I interrupt myself. So there are some notes at the back, which I didn't want you to have before I'd spoken. I understand that when I finish, there'll be some questions and answers, if you feel so moved to ask any, and if I'm able to answer them. Following which, I'd like to do a little visualization, a style of a meditation with you, and the words for that will also be in a little leaflet at the back. So hopefully that will be an experience and a pleasurable one for you as well to wrap up the speaking from the table, from the front, so to speak. Anyway, let's get stuck into it. An Ineffable Apology, the Psychical Cycle of Life. As a synopsis, this brief, apologies for reading, but you know you're going to get what I intend to deliver. This brief presentation is about the psychical cycle and demonstrates how images reveal emotions, and emotions lead to the formulation of imagination, which is shaped by our experiences and cultural background. I will discuss how imagination gives rise to actions or responses, and these are treated as the metaphysical consequences of images and imagination. These consequences, some of which can be explained, which is logical, and some not, mystical or psychical, form the building blocks of our memories, which in turn formulate the cycle of further imaginations in response to further images. It is the mystical consequences arising from images that this presentation asserts need not be justified, either by science or by faith, because explanation is superfluous in the context of a spiritual experience. If you've got a spiritual experience, just relish it. The terms ineffable, apology, psychical, metaphysical are explored in the context of my presentation. Right, so the theme of the conference is images and imagination, and notwithstanding the raison d'etre of this fellowship, it is via images and imagination that the whole of humanity has arrived at where it is today. I hope to demonstrate via what I will call the psychical cycle of life that the ineffable, in other words, that which is too great or extreme to be expressed or described in words, may be accepted as is, without the need to justify or explain in scientific terms. As such, what I have to say is in the manner of the mid-16th century meaning of the word apology. I can see some recognition here. Insofar that what I assert is a defence against the accusation that all things must be explained in terms that are understandable to a scientific mind. If one can be comfortable with the ineffable, one is comfortable with the spirit. One may prefer, however, to interchange the words ineffable and psychical, as for the purpose of this topic, they may be considered interchangeable. So firstly, I want to talk about images. Images are tangible and are a fixed reality. Images are what we sense primarily with vision or touch, but need not necessarily exclude that which is perceived by our other senses as well. Images, therefore, are beyond dispute. What you see is what is, and is what you get. Images are fact and are constrained by the physical and natural boundaries of space and time. Now I want to go on to emotions. Emotions, or feelings, stir the imagination, and, depending upon our first-hand experiences and perhaps cultural influence, we develop various responses. The first response, however, when presented with an image, is an emotional one. However much humanity wishes to convince itself that it is a rational and logical being, it is because, and it has been shown, the distance between our brain's sensory receptors and our emotive centre is far shorter than that for the receptors and our rational and logical centres. This means that for any given stimulus, image, touch, smell, etc., our first response is an emotive one, with a rational response following it. Now, for some, this comes as no surprise, and many will identify with the expression gut reaction or leading, and ascribe significant weight to these phenomena. Emotions, therefore, are the primary driver in our lives. Now I'm going to talk about imagination. Whilst our imaginations may be constructed, as in the case of novelists, poets or artists, they may also be autonomous and to an extent, especially when initially experienced, beyond our control. It is only when our imaginations trouble us that we seek to control them. This is when humanity begins to engage in the understanding of these things by turning to the practices of philosophy, meditation and health activities such as cognitive behavioural therapy and yoga in order to make a contribution to our well-being. In other words, if you're happy, you don't bother to explore it. You only explore what you're unhappy with. So imagination is intangible. What we imagine may be based upon our knowledge, but also is significantly influenced by our life experiences. One could look at a flame, an image, and then fondly bring to mind a pleasant occasion with warm and friendly company gathered around a campfire, chatting and engaging in convivial pastime. Equally plausible is the thought or imagination of conflagrations and the destructive power to life and the terrible havoc a flame could wreak. Therefore, one image can lead to two or more themes for our imagination to work on. So now I'm going to talk about something I call psychical conflict. I have to explain that this is not a theme of mine. When I was asked to speak with you, I was told the theme of this weekend was images and imagination. I thought, well, what do I know about that? Well, you're finding out what I know about that. It's totally original. It's never been done before. So psychical conflict. A psychical conflict is one that cannot be explained. It is ineffable and sometimes occurs within us when our hearts tell us one thing and our brain tells us another. Resolving these conflicts is often quite difficult and provides a significant anguish because we experience this tension between feeling and logic, or in other words, between our emotion and our reason. And I think this has led to what I'm going to call psychic evolution. Evolution is a state of change. Humans are said to have evolved from apes. In their development, humans acquired certain skills and competencies deemed necessary for the present and future days. Now, typically, these skills would be cerebral, but humans also forewent capabilities such as the ability to live simply off the land, and we surrendered physical attributes such as agility and strength, as they were deemed less important and critical than before. So we can't do these things anymore. The loss of certain attributes is perhaps explainable, but from today's perspective, the ability to live simply seems an illogical attribute to have surrendered to progress. Whilst Darwin may well have explained his theory of the evolution of species, he did rather mislead in naming his work on the origin of species that he never actually had wrote about. The resulting 1860 Oxford debate between Thomas Henry Huxley and Bishop Samuel Wilberforce is a significant milestone in the creation versus science debate, which both sides claim to have won. When the debate is rerun today, and it often is, as Richard Dawson's book The God Delusion is a good example, it tends to be done using much the same arguments as 150 years ago. This is a shame, because there is a significant following for the psychical, or ineffable, as I like to say, the divine within our society. Now, I've been a bit serious up to now, so before I get into the psychical cycle, and there is a point to this, I should just like to deviate with a little story about the Pope and the Jew. I figure it to be okay, without causing offence, because I read this story recently in a book by a Jesuit priest. So if anyone knows this story about the Pope and the Jew, then bear with me, but it does have relevance to images and imagination. So a few centuries ago, the Pope decreed that all the Jews had to get out of Rome. He said it's a Christian city and we don't want them. Now, many people were upset by this because there were strong and affectionate bonds between the two communities. And so you can understand that they made representations to the Pope and said, look, come on, guy. And in the end, he relented somewhat. He said that if the Jews could better him in a debate, then he would allow them to stay. Now, this was not an easy challenge for the Jews, because the Pope was well known for his powerful skills of rhetoric and his eloquence. And so the Jews searched high and low for a person to enter the debate, and in the end settled upon a modest little chap who was the doorkeeper to the local synagogue. And after a lot of pressure and cajoling, he relented, but only on one condition, which was that the debate must not use words. When this condition was put to the Pope, amazingly, he agreed. And so the day of the big debate arrived, and the Pope decided to start things off, and he did so by holding up 3 fingers. The little Jew thought for a moment, and then held up one. The Pope frowned. He frowned a little more and waved his hand around his head, to which the Jew responded by jabbing his finger at the ground. The Pope looked a little bit more concerned, smiled to himself, then he brought out the Eucharist, which he set before the Jew. The Jew looked a little surprised, he smiled, and then he took out an apple. And the Pope stood up and said, it's too much, this guy's far too clever for me, the Jews can stay. Well, a little while later, the cardinals approached the Pope and said to him, how come? What's happened here? And the Pope said, well, I started off by holding up 3 fingers to signify the Trinity of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. But the Jew responded by holding up 1 finger, saying, so what? We worship one same God. I then circled my hand around my head to say, God is all around us, to which he replied by stabbing his finger at the ground and asserting, yes, he is here, supporting both you and me. Finally, said the Pope, I brought out the bread and the wine, the body and blood of Christ, to show that God had given us the Eucharist. He then responded by showing me an apple, to remind me of our original sin and the fallibility of humanity. The Jew had an answer for everything. What could I do but concede? Later, the rabbis asked the little doorkeeper how it was that he had won the debate. And he replied, well, first the Pope held up 3 fingers to tell us that we had 3 days to get out of Rome. I then held up 1 finger to say, not one of us is leaving. And the Pope then waved his hand around and said, you all got to clear out. And I said, we're staying right here. And the rabbi said, well, what happened next? And the little doorkeeper said, well, that's the strangest thing. He got out his lunch and I got out mine. Friends, to bring us back to the point, whatever the image that is presented to us, our imaginations will make of them whatever they will. There is no guarantee that we will have the same experience, even though we may share the same circumstances. So back to the serious bit, the psychical cycle. For every psychical event, there has to be an initial stimulus. And in this instance, it is the apparition, the appearance of an image. An image is perceived by our sense organs. Its presence is transmitted to our sensory receptor in the brain, and an emotional response is triggered. This emotional response may, of course, vary in intensity from a vague awareness to extreme levels of cognizance, often illustrated in the fight or flight syndrome, or perhaps some other conflicts such as love and hate, or anger and serenity. These emotive responses may be followed nanoseconds later by a rational response, and depending upon the degree of shock or intensity that the emotional response elicited, may bring about a slow or rapid disposition within us, or place where we've arrived at. This disposition is our imagination, and depending upon previous history and cultural conditioning, one will respond with an action. This phase of what I've called the psychical cycle is complete when such a course of action is determined. So the next part of the cycle I'm going to call the metaphysical movement. I'm not quite happy with it, but if you've got better terms, let me know tomorrow. Metaphysics, in its simplest manner of understanding, is the study of the basic nature of things. In this, the psychical cycle, the basic movement is the physical response or action arising from the initial reaction to the image. The basic response may be a thought process, some uttered language or sound, or perhaps a physical movement or some sort, but nonetheless is tangible, and because of this there is a consequence. Consequences may be minuscule or significant. At a minuscule level, the metaphysical movement may be just a thought, a fleeting creation of a memory, and at its significant level, the metaphysical movement could be a physical action such as fight or flight, or an utterance such as an expletive, or a sob, or a laugh. There may be many other responses manifested in language. Now, for most of our lives, the metaphysical movement occurs many times a day without us even being aware that it happens. It's no big shakes, and such an everyday occurrence that there is nothing puzzling or inexplicable about it. In fact, typically, it is neither psychic nor ineffable. However, as we know that not all human beings are 1.9 meters tall or live exactly to 75 years of age, we know there is a natural variability in all things. But we also know that some things are not always immediately explainable. Scientists like to define patterns of variations and call them distributions, the most common being the binomial distribution or bell-shaped curve, but there are others that reflect the natural order of things, and scientists have been clever enough to develop formula to define and predict the populations to which they apply. But not in every case. And in those cases, scientific certainty is replaced by scientific probability. And where scientific probability fails to provide a useful service, then the arena of scientific research is entered into. Sometimes, however, science does not pursue the inexplicable. The reasons are unimportant, but it may be because of unseen benefits or lack of resource, or perhaps because of cultural dissuasion. How many people, for example, before Columbus were put off sailing west to find India because everybody knew the world was flat? The idea was stupid. Well, that's a cultural dissuasion. What is certain is that science has not yet explained everything. There are various responses to this, such as not yet anyway, give science time, no material need, too busy, not interested. But sometimes, for some people, the only response is it's not necessary to explain. I just recognise that this exists. For the sake of clarification, this phenomena I'm talking about is manifested in our imagination. Let me give an example. Many of us have experienced a psychic moment. We've been somewhere never before visited, but felt immediately familiar and knowing about the place. Other times we've sensed being talked about, and many of us have felt the benefit of others praying for us or sending distant healing. And we have all heard the words, "Whoa, someone's just walked over my grave." One cannot deny these feelings, and many are disinclined to anyway. But what is certain is that one has become aware of something, stimulated by an image or sensation, and this has sparked our imagination. These events, while not necessarily everyday, are not rare, and we seldom feel the need to explore the why and the wherefore of them, and culturally just accept them as experiences and a further contribution to our lives. Nonetheless, there's been an image stimulating emotion and logical cerebral reaction, leading to what I have termed the metaphysical movement. As mentioned earlier, this happens many times a day, and there's nothing unusual or extraordinary about it. It's just natural and is accepted as it is. Now, a few years ago, I took a party of Quakers to Cerne Abbas, about 35 miles away from here. It is famous for a giant man carved out of the chalk hillside and in an obvious state of amorous excitement. I'm glad I don't have to explain that. Not quite so well known is that at the foot of the hill is an ancient holy well, said to have been visited by St. Augustine and is so named after him. Our party visited the well and sat around it in the Quaker style of stillness and contemplation. It was a wonderful time. The well was situated in a little dell, and the setting was peaceful and sylvan and painted in so many shades of green that nothing but healing and kindness was present. This was emphasised by the sounds of birdsong and the gentle tinkling of water and the damp, earthy smell of the surrounding woodland. Hung in the branches of the overhanging trees were hundreds of little prayer ribbons and tokens left by many visitors to this place. My point being that this place had a special energy or aura about it. People sensed it and they relished the experience of it and returned to savour it on further days. I cannot explain why people feel the way they do about St. Augustine's well, and I suspect other places as well. But the important thing for me is that the experience, which is just an experience, does not need to be explained. It just may be savoured or enjoyed. The energy at the place has been appreciated for as long as living memory, and perhaps for centuries before that. It is just a spring sprouting from a hillside, and has probably served the local population in a utilitarian and domestic manner for many more centuries. But it's a spiritual place. This place has been accorded a special and spiritual significance without feeling a compunction to explain the why and the wherefore. So, without any display of extravagance, this place is termed a holy well. There is no need to justify this designation. Folk visit, they absorb images in the form of sights and sounds and smells, their imaginations are stimulated, and they have an experience of the spiritual. It passes into history, but is retained in memory to be partially or fully recalled the next time the images of similar sights, sounds or smells are encountered. And so this holiness, this psychic experience is repeated time and time again in a cycle that is perpetuated by images and imagination ad infinitum. So that's the psychical cycle. So I hope I've described the visit to St. Augustine's Well as a positive experience. But not all mystical experiences are pleasurable. They can be difficult and even unpleasant, especially when the images are created via thought rather than something visual, like or a picture or something like that. So I'm reminded of a Japanese Zen master holding class with a group of novice monks. They were engaged in a serious debate about heaven and hell and the big religious and philosophical topics of the day. One novice, eager and enthusiastic, raised his hand and asked of the master, "But master, what is the difference between heaven and hell?" The master looked at him for a while and said to the class, This is a most profound question, and in the context of this class, drives to the very heart of our existence. This question is worthy of the most learned and wise monks, and we should all be grateful to this novice for setting us on the path to enlightenment. The master was then silent for a moment or two, let his words sink in, and the novice glowed with pride at the contribution he'd made. And then the master said, "Yeah, a remarkable question. Remarkable indeed, coming from a novice who has such little intelligence that I wonder how he ever got placed in this class in the first instance." The class was horrified, and the novice was aghast and consumed with humiliation, shame and anger. Then the master smiled gently, and placing his hand softly on the novice, explained, "I do not have the words to describe heaven or hell, but I have nonetheless just taken you there. My words of praise created an image of yourself, and you felt as if you were in heaven, or you imagined you were. Conversely, my insult and denigration so publicly delivered took you to hell. But these are places within your own mind, and are both sides of the same coin, your ego." So words too can be images, and therefore tangible because they are what we see or perceive. They stimulate our feelings and imaginations, which are transient and intangible, and they feed our memories, which contribute to the next cycle of our psychical experiences. Words can be terribly powerful images in their effect, but it is our imaginations that do the damage. It is because words are so common and imagination so exercised that love and compassion, and especially healing, should ever be present in our society. And this, therefore, is a rational argument for a psychical present. So, presence. Summary: images reveal emotions. Emotions stir the imagination. Imagination gives rise to action or response. Action is manifested in the metaphysical movement, which is the basic response to all things. The metaphysical movement may be triggered by a logical cause or a mystical source. The former is termed rational and the latter spiritual or psychical. The event comprising image, emotion, metaphysical movement passes into memory as an experience, and it influences both emotive and logical centres of our brains. Further images reveal further images, and a psychical cycle is repeated. One does not need science to justify that putting one's finger into a fire will cause pain. It's not deemed necessary. One does not need God or the Spirit to justify sensations we experience that we label spiritual or mystical or psychical. It's not necessary. The basic nature of all things is the Spirit, which is the generator, the organizer, and the determiner of all things. It is through our spirit that images reveal our emotions, which stir the imagination, triggering a responsive action that feeds our memories and fuel further emotions arising from further images, and so on in the ever-recurring psychical cycle.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Well,
Not to say, really. We have got time for a few questions. How long does the meditation take?
about 8 minutes.
It is, okay. Well, we've got quite a lot of time, actually. Right, it's now 5:15, so has anybody got any questions? Or comments, or...
I've learnt that there's only one thing worse than a silent audience, and that's a silent audience advancing towards me. So,
I would just like to ask, where does God come in?
wow, how does one answer that? It's a very personal response I can give. So to play on words, God is there. He doesn't come in. He's with us all the time. I just recognise God's existence as a contributor to the spirit, to what becomes our soul. I was very influenced by a book which I quote here. The words which I use are explained in this paper. There's no need to go into them, but I was quite influenced by a book recently by Leonard Richard, the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit. His book was called "Where the Hell is God?" And it's particularly useful for people suffering bereavement. And he made the point that a lot of people would disagree with, but I thought it was quite sweet. He said, God cannot afford to involve himself with too much detail, but he's there all the same. And he's looking after the general things, and detail is for us to work out, which makes our spiritual lives quite exciting, I think. So God is there all the time. For myself, I keep coming back to one of my favourite words. God is ineffable. He's beyond words. And it just does for me to say God is there. And the moment I try to explain him or any other things about God, it just leaves me to a path of confusion and frustration. I suppose this is faith. Isn't it? Faith is not knowledge. And so I can't really answer your question too well, but he's there.
Something to discriminate between what seems to be the spirit in a very sort of ordinary way. You seem to be making it just seem a natural part of us, and the power of the Holy Spirit, which I find very strengthening and comforting. Left to my own devices, I suppose I've had a lot of spiritual experiences, but when I am really in difficulties or puzzled and I want the guidance of God, but I just feel that Jesus promised the Holy Spirit, and that's something that's like, if your ordinary spirit is like the cake, well, this is the icing that I feel we have the privilege of coming to, well, think about, appeal to, and just generally be a source of power.
Can I see a difference between the Spirit and the Holy Spirit? Not really, not much. I've never tried, I'm firing from the hip, so to speak, here in responding to you. We all have spiritual moments of awe and wonder. For me, that's a spiritual thing, and that's something which I feel inside. And those are my feelings. And I suppose the Holy Spirit is something very similar, sort of a powerful emotive thing, which has come from outside. I can see any image, usually a natural thing, people will feel it, stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon and you have a wonderful spiritual moment. But I just don't know where the two would come together. I'm not able to say.
Just as a contribution, not as a riposte or anything, I'd like to quote from past president of the Church's Fellowship, Martin Israel.
Oh.
He once wrote, "If I personally were asked by an interested but totally uncommitted observer what I meant by the word God, I would say a presence of spiritual aspiration beyond myself by which my life is guided towards the light." He then went on to say, "Any more positive definition confuses the divine mystery in a mass of human reasoning and verbiage," which I quite like. "The light towards which God guides me is embraced in the three ultimate values, beauty, truth, and goodness, as declared by Plato. The Christian would prefer to substitute the quality of love for goodness, but the intention is the same," he says. "A mode of self-transcendence in which we are part of the vast body of creation, in a glory that both obliterates the little ego and brings the full person into unique actualization as a servant of love for the whole community."
Thank you, Stephen, for your talk. I was interested in the way you brought in emotion, because in the talks that we have had in this conference, we've had a lot about imagination and words and images and things like that. But there hasn't been much mention of emotion. I've done quite a lot of work on the importance of emotions, because in a lot of research of afterlife, emotions still play an important part of the person's development afterlife, because it's the emotions that we have here carry over and still have effect on the other side. For an example, if there's a great deal of unrest in a place which is coming from a deceased spirit, it can affect its emotion from that side onto our world on this side. So I was really interested that you brought out the emotional impact in imagination and when we look at images, because I don't think people really listen to the emotional effect of whatever happens to us. They accept it, but don't see the actual emotion. We tend to put words into it, but we forget that emotional impact.
Yes, we do. Emotions they're experienced and they're perceived by us all, but we don't give very much thought to them. And I'll quote Darwin again. Apart from him being an expert on worms and Galapagos and things like that, he made a very profound statement, and that he said that the outward display of an emotion only intensifies it. And I constantly reminded myself of this when I'm saying, "Look, Steve, don't get cross. Keep yourself under control. It's just another driver, okay? Let him go and overtake you, whatever." But people will wind themselves up, and they wind themselves up because they're letting their emotions come out. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to let your emotions come out, but let them come out in a healthy way, sport or some other form. But be aware that the more display you give to your emotions, the more you're likely to wind yourself up with that. Some people will start off laughing and end up hysterical over the silliest of little things. That's an emotional thing. So when Darwin made that very simple observation, I picked up, I can't even tell you what book it was that it was in, but for me it was very important that emotions are something which we take for granted, but we don't actually think about. You know, when we see somebody else's emotion, the first thing we do is lay our emotion on top of it. Right? And that's not necessarily a good thing.
Is there anything else you want to say, Stephen?
No, just thank you for your attention, and I hope I've given you food for thought. I'm a stranger here, so I've no idea if this is this speaks to your condition, as Quakers would say, or not. But I got a thumbs up. That's very nice. So thank you very much. So I'll move on to something else which I've done. When I was asked to do this, I told it to be about 45 minutes or so, and then question and answers. And I know that my delivery would have been about 30, 35 minutes. We've run out of time. I haven't got enough material there. So what I want to do with you, because it might be fun and it might be enjoyable, is a visualization that is on your theme of images and imagination. But it's also me being a little bit selfish, because coming from the healing community that I share with Cherry, we believe that healing is about moving a person towards wholeness. You know, we talk about being a whole human being, so his head's nodding, so you understand that. But what do we mean by being whole? I propose an answer in one of my books at the back there, but I'll say that I think wholeness, being a whole and complete person, is actually the absence of need. There is nothing you need at all, just to feel that contentment, that state of bliss. We all want to have, but we don't often say, I'd like to be I'd like to achieve a state of bliss. It's not a common expression, is it? But deep down inside, I think we all aspire to that. So I have a little visualization here that I've entitled Imagination and Wholeness, and at the back that you'll be able to take one of these home if you want to and read it for yourself. Now, just to give this a little bit of weight, I have a little bit of music to go with it, because I like that. It adds to the ambience. So thank you for indulging me. Mind you, a captive audience, aren't you? So just imagine for a moment that you're now going to go into a sort of a meditation type thing. So just, if you want to close your eyes, hold your hands and just calm down, slow your breathing, and just relax, you know, get yourself grounded. And I shall run through this. Hopefully this will start at the right place. If it doesn't, I'll just do a couple of clicks and I'll get to the music I want to. Okay, so let's see how we go. When I use the word I, think of it as yourself, as me. I am what I perceive I am. For I am an entity. That is a fact, and I am real. But I have thoughts about myself, and my imagination is exercised. To others, I present an image, and they imagine many things. I am a traveller, and the vehicle I travel in is my body. I am a thinker, and my thinking is with my mind. I have feelings and emotions on the wonder of all things. And these experiences are my spirit. And the essence of my travelling, my thoughts and my senses, is ineffable. This essence is my soul and is infinite in its existence. My body is the only one I have, but it has brought me to this moment of awareness. My mind shares thoughts and knowledge with many others, but it has brought only me to this moment of awareness. I cannot describe my spirit, but there may be something. And when I feel it, I am joyous. When my body is unburdened, I feel light and lively. When my mind is still, I have space inside to think. When my senses are free of rules and doctrine, I see things differently. When my body is released of morbid wastes, when my mind has released too much clutter, and my spirit is released from doctrine and dogma, I feel whole. I feel whole when I am untroubled by food. I feel whole when I am not thinking. I feel whole when I am enlightened and I become free of images and imagination, and I am released of all things. Because I am at one with Om, and because I am whole.